"Oh, you came to this store? A dress here costs an entire year of your salary." Sophie burst out laughing, making the whole boutique turn to look at Clara as if she were beneath them, someone who came only to admire but would never touch. Evelyn coldly added, "My daughter would never dress like some office clerk like you." Clara stayed silent, only smiling, then handed her card to the manager. The manager bowed. "As always, the payment has been processed by you." No one had expected that the entire cost of those splendid wedding gowns had been covered by Clara from the very beginning. Clara stood there, her plain gray sweater and faded jeans, a stark contrast to the glittering dresses hanging around her. The boutique smelled of expensive perfume and fresh lilies, and the mirrors reflected every snicker from Sophie's friends. Clara's face didn't change, but her fingers tightened slightly around the strap of her canvas bag. She'd come to help her brother's fiancée Sophie pick out a gown not to be the target of their sport. Sophie's laughter still echoed sharp like glass, and Evelyn's eyes scanned Clara from head to toe, her lips curling as if she'd smelled something sour. One of Sophie's friends, a woman with overdone highlights and a too-tight dress, leaned in and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. She probably just came to stare at the luxury. No way she could afford a thing here. The tailor, a nervous man with a tape measure around his neck, glanced at Clara, unsure what to do. Sophie waved him off, her manicured nails flashing. "Don't let her touch the fabric. She'll dirty it," she said, smirking. Clara's brother David stood off to the side, scratching the back of his neck, letting out an awkward laugh that cut deeper than the insults. He didn't say a word to defend her. Clara's smile stayed small and steady as she slid her card across the counter. The manager's bow was quick, professional, but it shifted the air. Sophie's smirk faltered for a split second. Evelyn blinked, her head tilting like she'd misheard. The friend with the highlights froze mid-sip of her champagne. Clara didn't say anything. She just adjusted her bag and walked toward the door, her steps, even her back, straight. As Clara stepped onto the sidewalk, a cold wind hit her face, carrying the faint sound of a street musician playing a violin a block away. The melody was slow, mournful, and it stopped her for a moment. She stood still, her breath visible in the air, watching the musician. A young woman with a scarf wrapped tight around her neck, her fingers red from the cold. Clara reached into her bag, pulled out a few bills, and dropped them into the open violin case. The musician looked up surprised and nodded a quiet thank you. Clara's eyes lingered on her for a second longer, catching the way her hands shook as she played. It wasn't pity that moved Clara, it was recognition. She'd seen that kind of quiet grit before in herself, in the way she had learned to keep going no matter what people threw at her. The boutique's glass doors reflected the streetlights behind her, and Sophie's voice still carried faintly now, mocking someone else. Clara turned away, her boots clicking against the pavement, and headed toward the subway, her shadow long and steady under the street lamps. "Hey, before we go on, can you do me a quick favor? Grab your phone, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. It means a lot to share these stories with you, and I'd love to know you're out there listening." Alright, let's keep going. The pre-wedding party was a week later, held in a hotel ballroom that glittered like a chandelier. Crystal glasses clinked, and the guests, Sophie's socialite friends and Evelyn's country club crowd, moved like they owned the place. Clara stood near a tall window watching the city lights flicker outside. She wore a plain black dress, no jewelry, her hair pulled back in a low bun. Sophie, in a shimmering gown that cost more than a car, raised her glass and called for a toast. "Thanks to the Miller family for giving me such a luxurious wedding," she said, her voice dripping with pride. The room cheered, but Evelyn's eyes locked onto Clara. She tilted her chin and her pearl necklace catching the light. "My daughter deserves to marry into wealth," she said loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, "not to have a commoner for a sister-in-law." Clara's fingers paused on her glass, but her face stayed calm. Sophie's friends, a pack of women in designer heels and fake tans, didn't miss a beat. One, a real estate heiress with a sharp jawline and sharper tongue, leaned toward her friend and muttered, "Clara probably couldn't save enough in her lifetime to pay for today's flowers." The table laughed. David, standing next to Sophie, grinned like it was all a big joke. "It's true," he said, shrugging. "Clara doesn't care about big matters." Sophie, basking in the attention, added, "If I lived her life, I wouldn't dare look in the mirror." Clara met Sophie's eyes just for a moment. Then she took a slow sip of her water, set the glass down, and said, "Interesting?" Her voice was soft, but it cut through the chatter like a knife. The table went quiet. Nobody knew what to say. Clara's silence wasn't weakness, it was armor. But as she stood by that window, a server approached carrying a tray of appetizers. He was young, maybe 19, with a nervous smile and a tie that didn't quite sit right. "Ma'am," he said, offering her a plate, "these are compliments of the chef." Clara nodded, taking a small tart. But before she could thank him, one of Sophie's friends, a woman with a loud laugh and a diamond bracelet, snapped her fingers at him. "Boy, don't waste those on her," she said, pointing at Clara. "She's not here for the food. She's just decoration." The server froze his tray, wobbling. The woman's friends giggled and the sound spread to the next table. Clara set the tart down untouched and looked at the server. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice steady. To Tom, he stammered, his face red. Clara smiled, small but warm. "Thank you, Tom. Keep up the good work." The server nodded, his shoulders relaxing, and hurried away. The woman with the bracelet rolled her eyes, muttering, trying to act important now. Clara didn't respond. She turned back to the window, her reflection faint against the city lights, her hands steady as she adjusted her bag. The party's energy shifted when a man in a tailored suit, one of Evelyn's business associates, approached Clara. He had a slick smile and a glass of whiskey in his hand. "You're David's sister, right?" he said, his voice loud enough to draw attention. "Heard you're the quiet type. Bet you're just here to soak up the glamour." Clara looked at him, her eyes steady. But before she could speak, he leaned closer, his breath sharp with alcohol. "Don't get any ideas about fitting in. This crowd's out of your league." The people nearby chuckled, their eyes darting between Clara and the man. She didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her bag, pulled out a small notebook, and jotted something down. The man laughed, thinking it was a nervous habit. "What's that, your grocery list?" he said, winking at the crowd. Clara closed the notebook, her movements precise, and said, "No." "Your name?" The man's smile dropped. He stepped back suddenly, unsure, as a few guests exchanged glances. Clara slipped the notebook back into her bag and walked away, leaving a ripple of silence in her wake. Clara didn't stay long at the party. She slipped out before the dessert course, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. As she waited for her coat, a waiter dropped a tray of glasses nearby, and the crash made her flinch. For a second, she was 16, standing in her family's dining room, watching her mother scold a maid for breaking a plate. Careless, her mother had said, her voice like ice. Clara had wanted to help the maid pick up the pieces, but her mother's hand on her wrist stopped her. "Don't," she'd said. "You're above that." Clara hadn't understood then, but she did now. Her family's wealth wasn't just money, it was power, and power came with distance. She'd rejected that distance, choosing plain clothes and a quiet life. But it didn't stop people from seeing her as less. The coat check girl handed Clara her jacket, a simple wool thing, and gave her a small, knowing smile. Clara nodded back, grateful for the silent understanding. She stepped into the elevator, the doors closing on the party's noise, and let out a slow breath. The wedding ceremony was the main event, set in a sprawling estate with gardens that looked like they belonged in a painting. Clara arrived early, helping the florist adjust a garland that had slipped from an arch. She wore a navy dress, knee-length, no frills, her face bare of makeup. The guests trickled in, their voices loud, their outfits louder. Evelyn was there in a cream suit that screamed money, her eyes narrowing as she spotted Clara near the altar. She marched over her heels, sinking into the grass. "My son deserves a bride with a dowry," she said, her voice carrying over the soft music. Sophie in her wedding gown laughed from a few feet away. "That's right," she called. "Clara should take notes. Poor women can't do more than clean up." The bridesmaids, a clique of status-obsessed women with perfect curls and fake smiles, joined in. One, a tech CEO's daughter with a diamond choker, shouted. She probably went into debt to contribute a little. The guests nearby clapped, egging them on. David in his tux stepped back, muttering, "Mother, I don't want our family to be shamed." Clara stood still, her hands clasped in front of her. She looked at Evelyn, then at Sophie, her eyes steady. "Is that so?" She said, her voice low but clear. The clapping stopped. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Clara turned to the florist, handed her a small card with instructions, and walked away. Her steps measured her head high. As Clara moved through the crowd, a woman in a sequined gown, one of Sophie's cousins, blocked her path. She held a champagne flute, her lips painted red, her eyes gleaming with malice. "You know, Clara," she said, loud enough for the nearby guests to turn, "you're like a stray dog at this wedding. Nobody wants you here, but you keep showing up." The crowd tittered, some hiding their smiles behind their drinks. Clara paused, her hands still at her sides. She looked at the woman, her gaze steady, and said, "A stray dog still knows its way home." The words landed like a slap, quiet but sharp. The woman's smile froze her flute, trembling in her hand. A few guests coughed, looking away. Clara stepped around her, her movements smooth, and continued toward the back of the venue where the staff were setting up chairs. One of the workers, an older man with a limp, caught her eye and gave her a small nod, as if he'd seen the whole thing and understood. The ceremony was supposed to start at sunset, with fairy lights twinkling and a string quartet playing. Clara stood near the back, watching the guests settle into their seats. She'd been quiet all day, moving like a shadow, helping where needed. But the air felt different now, heavier. A woman in a red dress, one of Sophie's college friends, nudged her neighbor and pointed at Clara. "Look at her standing there like she belongs," she said, loud enough to turn heads. "She's probably just here for the free food." Another guest, a balding man with a Rolex, chuckled. "Bet she's never even been to a place like this before." Clara's fingers brushed the edge of a program she'd been holding, but she didn't look up. Instead, she handed the program to a young girl in a pink dress who smiled shyly and ran back to her mother. The moment passed, but the whispers didn't. They grew, circling Clara like vultures. She kept her focus on the altar where Sophie was adjusting her veil, laughing with her bridesmaids. Evelyn stood nearby, directing the photographer with sharp gestures. David was nowhere to be seen, probably off with his groomsmen, avoiding the tension. Clara's phone buzzed in her pocket, but she ignored it. She didn't need to check it to know who it was. Before the officiant could begin, a man in a loud bow tie, a friend of David's from college, stood up from his seat and pointed at Clara. "Hey, you," he called, his voice slurred from too many drinks. "Why don't you do something useful and fetch us some more champagne?" The crowd roared with laughter, some clapping like it was a show. Clara turned slowly, her eyes meeting his. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she walked over to a nearby table, picked up an empty glass, and set it down in front of him with a deliberate clink. "Looks like you've had enough," she said, her voice calm but firm. The man's face turned red, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The laughter died down, replaced by awkward murmurs. Clara walked back to her spot, her steps unhurried as the officiant cleared his throat and tried to move things along. The man sank back into his seat, his bow tie suddenly looking too tight. The first crack in the facade came during the cocktail hour. Clara was near the bar, helping a server untangle a string of lights that had fallen. The hotel manager, a wiry man with glasses, approached her, his face tense. "Ms. Bennett," he said quietly, "there's an issue with the payment." Clara nodded, her expression unchanged. She followed him to a small office off the main hall, where a stack of contracts sat on the desk. Sophie's friends were nearby, sipping martinis, their eyes following her. "What's she doing now?" "One," muttered a woman with a fake laugh and a designer purse. "Probably begging for a discount." Clara didn't hear them, or if she did, she didn't show it. She signed a few papers, her handwriting precise, and handed them back to the manager. He hesitated, then said, "As always, your guarantee keeps this running smoothly." The words slipped out louder than he meant, and the women at the bar went quiet. One coughed into her drink. Clara gave the manager a small nod and walked back to the hall, her canvas bag slung over her shoulder. The women exchanged glances, but none dared say anything. Not yet. By the time the ceremony started, the tension was thick. Sophie walked down the aisle, her gown trailing like a waterfall, her smile wide but brittle. Evelyn sat in the front row, her hands folded tightly, her eyes darting to Clara every few seconds. Clara stood near the back, her arms crossed loosely, watching the vows unfold. David looked nervous, his tie slightly crooked, his hands fidgeting. The officiant's voice droned on, but the guests were distracted, whispering about Clara. "She's got some nerve standing there, like she's part of this one," said a man with a loud voice and louder cufflinks. Another, a woman with a fur stole, added, "She's probably jealous. No one like her could ever have a day like this." Clara's jaw tightened just for a moment, but she didn't move. Then Sophie's friend, the one with the diamond choker, stood up during a pause in the ceremony. "Clara," she called out, her voice sharp, "why don't you sit down? You're blocking the view." The room laughed, a cruel rolling sound. Clara turned, her eyes locking onto the woman's. "Am I?" she said, her voice soft but steady. The laughter stopped. The woman sat down, her face red, clutching her clutch like a lifeline. During the reception setup, Clara helped a caterer carry a tray of glassware to the back, her sleeves rolled up, her movements quick but careful. A group of Sophie's friends watched from a nearby table, their voices low but cutting. One, a woman with a sleek updo and a gold watch, leaned forward. "Look at her playing servant," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. Does she think that'll make her fit in? Another, a fashion influencer with a phone glued to her hand, snapped a photo of Clara and typed furiously, her lips curling. "This'll get some laughs online," she said, showing the screen to her friends. The post went up captioned, "When you crash a wedding but end up washing dishes." Clara set the tray down, her hands steady, and caught the flash of the phone. She walked over her steps slow and stopped in front of the table. "Nice shot," she said, her voice even. "Make sure you tag the right person." The influencer's fingers froze on her phone, her smile slipping. Clara turned away, wiping her hands on a napkin, and went back to helping the caterer, leaving the table in stunned silence. The breaking point came right after the vows. Evelyn stood up, her face flushed with triumph, and blocked Clara's path to the reception area. "My son deserves a bride with a dowry," she said, her voice loud enough to draw every eye. "Sophie now officially Mrs." Miller laughed from the altar. "Clara should take notes," she said, tossing her hair. "Poor women can't do more than clean up." The bridesmaids cheered, and the guests joined in, clapping like it was a performance. David stepped back, his face pale, muttering something about family shame. Clara stood there, her hands still, her eyes moving from Evelyn to Sophie to the crowd. She reached for the microphone on the officiant's stand, her movements slow, deliberate. "If that's the case," she said, her voice clear, "I'll withdraw." The room erupted in cheers, thinking she was backing down, running away. But then the manager's voice came through the speakers, quiet but firm, "If Ms. Bennett withdraws, the contracts are canceled immediately." The lights flickered. The music stopped. The venue staff began pulling tablecloths off tables. Sophie's face went white. "No," she screamed, her veil slipping. "This is my big day." As the chaos unfolded, Clara stood near the exit, watching the guests scramble. A woman in a green dress, one of Evelyn's old friends from the country club, pushed through the crowd and grabbed Clara's arm. "You can't do this," she hissed, her voice shaking with desperation. "You're ruining everything for Sophie." Clara looked at her, her eyes calm but piercing. She gently pulled her arm free and said, "I'm not ruining anything. I'm just choosing where my money goes." The woman stepped back, her face pale as if she'd been struck. The crowd around them went quiet, some guests staring at Clara with new eyes, others whispering furiously. A server nearby, the same Tom from the pre-wedding party, overheard and gave Clara a small, proud smile. She nodded back, her expression unchanged, and turned toward the door, her canvas bag swinging lightly at her side. The room was a mess now, with guests shouting and staff scrambling. Clara paused at the door, her hand on the handle. She turned back just for a moment and signaled to the AV team. The big screen at the front of the hall lit up, and bold white text appeared. "The wedding sponsorship has officially been transferred to the Orphan Children's Charity Fund." The room went silent. Cameras flashed as a news crew already on site for the high-profile wedding turned their lenses on the screen. A reporter's voice cut through the quiet, announcing the donation live on air. Clara's name was everywhere on the screen in the reporter's words, on the lips of the guests who now stared at her stunned. Sophie's sobs grew louder, but they were drowned out by the applause that started in the back of the room, from the staff, from the caterers, from the people who'd been invisible all night. Clara didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just turned and walked out her steps as steady as ever. Right before Clara reached the exit, a young girl, the one in the pink dress from earlier, ran up to her, clutching a crumpled flower from the garland Clara had helped fix. "This is for you," the girl said, her voice small but clear, holding out the flower. Clara knelt down, her navy dress brushing the floor, and took the flower gently. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft, her eyes warm for the first time that night. The girl beamed, then ran back to her mother, who watched Clara with a mix of awe and shame. The guests nearby fell silent, their earlier jeers forgotten. Clara tucked the flower into her bag, her fingers careful, and stood up. The moment felt like a pin dropping in a quiet room, small but impossible to ignore. She pushed open the door, the cool night air rushing in, and stepped outside without looking back. The fallout came fast. Sophie's friends, the ones who'd mocked Clara all night, were scrambling to save face. The woman with the diamond choker, whose name was Lauren, tried to laugh it off, but her sponsor, a luxury brand, dropped her the next day after the news went viral. The clip of her shouting at Clara was all over social media, with comments calling her out for cruelty. Evelyn's country club friends stopped inviting her to events. Her name was too tied to the scandal. David's law firm, embarrassed by the publicity, put him on indefinite leave. The guests who cheered for Clara's humiliation now avoided her name, but it didn't matter. The story was out there, shared and reshared, a testament to Clara's quiet power. She didn't post about it. She didn't give interviews. She just kept going, her life unchanged, her canvas bag still slung over her shoulder. A few days later, Clara was at a local diner sipping coffee and reading a newspaper when a woman approached her table. It was the coat check girl from the pre-wedding party now, in a worn jacket, her hands nervous. "I saw what you did," she said, her voice low. "I've been saving up to go to college, but it's hard. You gave me hope." Clara set her coffee down of her eyes, meeting the girls. She reached into her bag, pulled out a business card, and wrote a number on it. "Call this scholarship program," she said, handing it over. "Tell them I sent you." The girl's eyes widened, her fingers trembling as she took the card. Clara didn't say anything more. She just nodded, picked up her coffee, and went back to her newspaper, as if it was just another day. The girl stood there for a moment, then walked away clutching the card like it was a lifeline. The final moment came a week later at a charity gala Clara had organized for the Orphan Fund. She stood in a simple black dress no different from the one at the pre-wedding party, greeting donors with a calm smile. The room was packed, the air warm with candlelight and soft music. Sophie was there uninvited, standing awkwardly near the entrance, her eyes red. Evelyn hovered behind her, clutching a clutch purse, like it could shield her. David was absent, too ashamed to show. Sophie's friends, the ones who'd mocked Clara, lingered in a corner, their faces tight with forced smiles. A man approached Clara, his suit sharp but understated, his face kind. He was Michael, the main sponsor of the charity fund, a young businessman with a quiet presence. He took Clara's hand, his grip firm but gentle. "We're not just partners saving children," he said, his voice steady, loud enough for the room to hear. "I want to build a real family with you." The room burst into applause, louder than at the wedding, more real. Sophie's face crumpled. Evelyn looked away, her hands shaking. Clara met Michael's eyes, her smile small but warm. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. As the gala wound down, Clara stood by a table helping a volunteer sort donation pledges. A man in a waiter's uniform approached his face, familiar, the older worker with the limp from the wedding. "Ms. Bennett," he said, his voice rough but warm. "My daughter got into nursing school because of your charity." He pulled a small photo from his pocket, showing a young woman in a cap and gown, beaming. Clara took the photo, her fingers gentle, and looked at it for a long moment. "She's beautiful," she said, handing it back. The man's eyes glistened, and he nodded, unable to speak. Clara gave him a small smile, then went back to sorting pledges, her hands steady, her presence quiet but undeniable. The room around her buzzed with admiration, the kind that didn't need words. The gala ended late, with guests still talking about Clara as they left. She stayed until the end, helping the staff stack chairs, her hands steady as always. The news crews were gone, but the story lingered. Clara Bennett, the woman who'd turned a wedding into a movement, who'd walked through fire and come out shining. She didn't look back at Sophie or Evelyn. She didn't need their apologies. She'd never needed their approval. As she stepped into the night, Michael at her side, the city lights stretched out before her, bright and endless. She'd built her own path, not with noise or flash, but with quiet, unyielding strength. And in that moment under the stars, she was exactly where she belonged. "You've been there, haven't you? Judged for how you look, how you talk, how you carry yourself. You felt the sting of being dismissed, of being told you don't belong. But you kept going. You held your ground. You weren't wrong. You were never alone. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.